Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And this week I'm delighted that Gemma Rabbini has joined me from Coach and Bloom, and she's going to educate me on the topic of positive intelligence, which obviously I've heard of positivity and I've heard of intelligence, but I haven't heard of the two together being a thing. And Gemma, you explained to me that that is such, isn't it? So before we go into the podcast topic, would you like to introduce yourself, Gemma?
Yes, of course. It's lovely to be here. So I am an impact and confidence coach. So I specifically work with individuals and businesses, encouraging women to feel more confident about the work that they do, how to articulate themselves, and encouraging more diversity into businesses. So yeah, that's what I do. And I am hugely motivated about supporting people. And positive intelligence is just one of the ways that I do that.
And your business is particularly women in business? Is there a
Yes.
particular reason? Does that fit particularly with positive intelligence, or is that just coincidental?
So my background in the corporate world was at John Lewis for 13 years. And over the time that I spent there, I became increasingly frustrated and inspired by these senior women who perhaps were discounting themselves, perhaps talking down about themselves. And when it came with an opportunity for redundancy, I just took it because I thought I've got to do something about this feeling that I have about women just checking out a little bit and listening to those negative voices in their heads and letting that be the reason that they don't apply for big roles or they don't stay in the job market after maternity leave, etc. So I'm really motivated about supporting women in their career squiggles.
Oh yes, another good podcast link there. Yeah, and that's actually it's interesting you say that, because I have just recently had a conversation with somebody who was talking about resilience, and she was saying that women, statistically, it is a fact. It's like that women, in terms of their self-belief, which is one of the 5 elements of resilience, they are significantly less than men in that area, that self-belief thing, which absolutely fits with what you've just described. But that's not to say that the things we're talking about here are not appropriate to men as well, but that's where you can see there's a real gap, a niche.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming from being one of 3 girls and having a dad who kind of just said you can do anything you like, to navigate across the moors of Devon when I was 12, there's a lot of positive energy, I guess, in terms of the sky's the limit, you can do what you want. And then I think society can sort of put a bit of a it feels like it puts a bit of a limit on women, but positive intelligence is applicable to anyone in business, in sports, wherever. So that's what I love it. I love the concept of it. And so it can help lots of people. But yeah.
Great. Okay. So tell me what positive intelligence is then.
So positive intelligence is a concept that was kind of devised and researched by a guy called Shirzad Chamine. And it's essentially the proportion of the time that your mind is working for you versus the proportion of time that it's working against you. So the theory is that you can train your brain to react in a more positive, forward-thinking, centered way about anything that happens in life. But a lot of the time, particularly for women, but also men as well, we get these voices in our heads that tell us that they'll think you're stupid if you say that. I can't believe you just did that. That, what on earth is going to happen? We dramatize things a lot. And there are these voices in our heads that can sometimes restrict us from taking opportunities, make us overthink things that are going on in our lives. And there's a huge amount of research that he did, taken from positive psychology, performance sport, neuroscience, and it's essentially an operating system which is really super simple in a lot of ways. And there are specific kind of techniques that you can do to build your mental strength. So positive intelligence, essentially getting your brain, just like you would with your body, getting your brain into its optimal state for it to work for you. So just like you train your muscles in the gym, this is about your brain muscles and training them to be the strongest that they can, so you can navigate the challenges of life.
So are there certain techniques and things then that you would learn, or is it about sort of observing how your brain works and then catching those thoughts and tweaking them? Can you give us an example of something?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, because neuroscience is really quite overwhelming, I think, for a lot of people. But essentially, and I'm not qualified in neuroscience by any stretch, but I love the fact that this is so simple. So there are three kind of aspects to it. So exactly as you said, the first aspect is to identify what are those voices in your head. And there's an assessment that you can do that kind of says to you, actually, they've named them all. So there's 10 of them. And everyone has the judge, which is that judging thoughts. You judge other people, you judge situations, you think, well, that wasn't a very sensible thing. They must be quite silly, or that, or why did I do that? I'm such an idiot. Those kind of voices.
Yeah.
So everyone has the judge. And then there are some accomplice saboteurs. They call them saboteur voices. So negative, horrible voices that kind of sit in your head and say things to you. So you might have the victim voice, which is kind of, oh, this always happens to you, nothing you do ever goes right, well, that won't go well because it never does. Or it could be the people pleaser, they'll think I'm stupid if they say that. I have to do nice things for other people, otherwise I won't be worth anything, and that sort of thing. So the first thing is acknowledging the voices that you have, and people have a combination of different ones. Everyone has the judge, and then you have a combination of other ones that you can kind of assess how strong they are. So the assessment will kind of tell you your people pleaser is off the scale, Gemma, which it is. And then the second thing is well, actually, if they're the voices that are noisy in your head, what's the alternative? Because you can listen to those people, but they're not helpful to you. But strengthening your inner, what they call sage, your inner wisdom, the kind of the self-belief that you had in yourself when you were a child. So that kind of, I can do anything, the kind of the loving of yourself, the fact that you can, you really respect what you've got, you really channel all the things, all your strengths. And if someone, you can do anything, you kind of say, yeah, I'll give that a go. So your sage is your inner wisdom, your ability to navigate the challenges of life without going into those spiraling thoughts. Just kind of see the facts for what they are and move forward in a positive, focused way. And then, so those are the two sort of almost good and evil kind of in your head, having a bit of a battle. The third element to this is strengthening your PQ muscles. So this is, a situation happens, how can you strengthen the muscles from the fact that you've just missed the train as the trigger? And your brain will essentially be really good at going to you're such an idiot, I can't believe you're late. What's that going to mean for the meeting? They're going to think you're really unprofessional. But strengthening your PQ muscles is basically strengthening the muscles that will go from the negative reaction to the positive, that will go to your sage. So you miss the train, and actually your PQ muscles, if they're strengthened by these mini mindfulness techniques that kind of get taught within the program, that you will kind of end up with some questions that you would ask yourself and say, well, yes, I have missed the train. That's the fact. But what's the gift or opportunity? What could I think about? What's the benefit in missing the train? And it takes some time, and it takes some real kind of commitment to do these little kind of exercises that will essentially get you to a place where, well, I've missed the train, but actually I'll now get on a train that's later. It will be quieter. I have more time to really prepare for this meeting. Yes, I'm going to be late, but actually I've got someone who's going to be there, a colleague. What I'll do is I'll ring them, brief them on the meeting, and it's actually a really nice development opportunity for them. So, or I have to shorten the meeting, so I'm going to be much more punchy, and we're going to be really efficient. So it's that that's sort of the end game, really. is to have a situation that happens, and they happen all the time in everyday life, and you snap into your sage rather than your spiraling, noisy, horrible saboteurs that take you down a different path. So yeah, so that's very long-winded, but
that's great. You've explained it really, really well. It's interesting. There's parallels between these things. Years ago, I used to train on the 7 habits, and there's this whole thing about stimulus and response and putting the pause in the middle, which is what you're talking about here. It's your PQ muscles, but stopping and putting helpful things in the middle. I was going to ask you, when you talked about the voices in your head, does some of this link back to transactional analysis or drivers? Because I was thinking, have you come across the drivers thing? Some people might, because you have the people pleaser driver in that.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because a lot of people that I talk to about this kind of say, but that's a good thing though, isn't it? You can use that as a super strength. But the way that positive intelligence views it is that actually the lies that the saboteurs tell you will overplay themselves always. So everyone will have an element of these things, but actually your driver for validation from other people will often result in you doing things that really harm yourself. So you probably will find that if you have a drive, if you're doing that analysis and you have a driver of people, you've probably got the saboteur of the people pleaser. And it's about controlling those and kind of saying, you know, I want to take it up to a certain level, but now it's becoming quite disruptive when I'm doing something like deprioritizing me time to give to somebody because I think they might not like me if I don't do it. That's a trigger, and that's something that I need to put some space in between.
And so the obviously that's almost like emotional intelligence here. It says there's intelligence here in terms of understanding yourself, understanding what's going on in your head and how it can sabotage you, and making good decisions as to controlling your brain, basically, in terms of what's going to be the most helpful in that situation.
And there's a lot of benefit in when you're, so the PQ, they talk about kind of PQ muscles being strengthened, and the way that you do that is by dropping into your body. So there's like two minutes or sometimes just 4 breaths that you kind of get prompted to do 3 times a day, and you remember an incident that's happened and you kind of go into that, you kind of drop back, and it's usually it's using the senses. So it's either sort of tangible, so kind of rubbing your fingers together to feel the ridges on your fingertips, closing your eyes, and doing that really, putting that space in between you and the incident that's happened. But what you've just talked about is really interesting, because the other thing that they kind of talk about is actually when you're dealing with somebody else, and this is where I think it's really interesting from an organizational perspective, is when you're dealing with somebody else, how many times do we just listen to what we hear, what someone's saying, but we're just chatting in our minds? We think that's not fair, I didn't say that, you know, and you've got lots of voices. So actually doing PQ reps, or kind of this mindfulness, tangible, using the senses, you can actually do them when you're talking to somebody. And so thinking about what are they saying? How can I agree with them? 20% of what they're saying is going to be correct. How can I find that 20%? How can I find the good in this person? So that so you're very aware of your own kind of energy, but it's about making sure that you're not sending signals to other people that are challenging or conflicting or kind of coming out from all of the voices in your head. So quietening those down enables you to have better relationships with other people. So yeah, it's really interesting in terms of application.
So when you were talking there about the sort of the dropping into yourself, sort of being mindful about things and quietening things down, is that a sort of a technique that you would learn if you would to do on a regular basis to practice?
Yeah, so exactly. So they will often, the exercise might be to visually focus on something and really, really notice the nuances in what you're looking at. And you might only do that, you might breathe, maybe do 10 breaths and just look at that. But it's about getting control of your mind. So the premise of it is that if you can control your mind in that moment to focus on visual something or sounds, sometimes think about the furthest thing away you can hear. Now concentrate on the closest thing you can hear, which might often be your breath. Just, 10 breaths of doing that. And that's your practice of strengthening your muscles, so that when you say you've just missed the train, you're an idiot, you've got control to get your brain back into this. Okay, now I can ask myself some questions and I can focus on my sage. And there's sort of 5 different powers of your sage. So you can kind of ask yourself questions around those things, but it's super hard just to go straight from you're an idiot to let's look at the gift. It feels for a lot of people like that's a big jump to kind of say, it's a good thing I missed the train, because you won't probably feel like that. So it's what you described earlier. It's that space into kind of, getting control, and the space in between the incident and your reaction. So yeah, it's really interesting. But I'm not I'm not a big meditator. I'm not really into that kind of thing. But for me, it's really focused. Imagine the situation that happened last week where you had that difficult conversation. Now I want you to do some PQ reps, and they're very easy to fit into your day. It's not kind of, I need to dedicate half an hour to sit in a room cross-legged on the floor, which is my interpretation of what it might, I know meditation doesn't always need to be like that. They're very kind of focused, and I can see there's clear outcomes. So it really resonates with someone who's not into that at all.
Yeah, it's a doer's meditation. You're still doing something useful in terms of, I get that, because I struggle too. I had a moment there where I was trying to think about the link with your PQ muscles. It reminds me of something. I've also the sort of gratitude practice. I remember saying that if you have something that's really difficult that's happened to you, look, exactly, your example was really good, actually, the train one, looking at what possible positives could there be in the situation. It's just kind of trying to reframe it, which does mean that you get less panicked. Let's say you're really panicked or stressed about it, which is a negative spiral. It takes you at least into a positive spiral, or a less negative one, doesn't it? So it's a constructive way of managing.
And I think some of those questions, right, is there an opportunity here, or is there a gift? Is there a gift here? Or, I'm going to have more time to do my prep, so now I'm going to be better prepared for the meeting. Or is there an opportunity? And actually, the opportunity might be, the reason I'm late for the train is because I didn't have an alarm on my phone to like remind me. So actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that opportunity to set that alarm. So next time, I can still say goodbye to the kids, but I get a bit of a warning that I need to leave. So this learning,
bigger learning. Yes, that's a very mature experience, isn't it? I wonder if you, putting you on the spot here, you may not know them off the top of your head, but you talked about 5 questions that the sage asks you, and I thought can you share any of them, just because I thought they sounded quite interesting, or sort of, if we wanted to engage our sage, what sort of questions might we ask ourselves?
So the biggest question is, what is the gift or opportunity here? So that's kind of the big question you can always ask yourself. The 5 powers of the sage, I might not know all 5 of them off the top of my head, but there's the power of innovate. So what is the opportunity for me to come up with a new suggestion or a new idea? There's the power of empathize, which is how can I be as open-minded about this as possible? So how can I see the other person's perspective? What on earth might be right about what they've just said? There's the power of navigate, which is about this laser-focused action. So if I knew that this was important to me, what one action would I now take to move me forward into, to achieve that? That's only 3.
That's 3. That's good. I put you on the spot. We can always look it up, and I'm sure you'll give me links to this as well. Show notes. But it's just curious, because you mentioned something like that. I was just interested to know what it is like practically.
Yes, explore is the other one. Explore with great curiosity. So kind of, what else is going on here? How could I look at this? How might how do they say it? How might not an archaeologist, or sort of that sort of, how might they approach this problem? How might they kind of uncover things? How might a detective investigate this? So kind of putting yourself in a very inquisitive mindset.
Brilliant. Okay. So to our audience we've got here, because actually of course we've gone into this, which I just is interesting as an individual, as a person, because this is going on for all of us, and as a coach, if you're working one-on-one with others. If we're talking to HR professionals, is a lot of our audience, so they're one to many, have you any tips as to how this could be used, or how HR professionals might choose to use something like this?
So I think it's really interesting, because there's a lot of statistics in the book talking about the benefits. So the improved levels of success, the better relationships in terms of team dynamics. And I think this is particularly helpful when you have a team which is struggling, from a business perspective, as in it hasn't got the results that it wanted, but also there's difficult personalities, there's different kind of dynamics in the group that just aren't working, and the high performing team just isn't kind of coming together. Because what it does is it gives people, if everyone, so you could put all of the team on the program for 6 weeks, which really delves into benefiting them. So it's very kind of self-focused in a lot of ways. It gives people a lot of ownership for taking control of their own reactions to things. But it also means that, and I've done this with small teams in local businesses, it gives everybody the chance to, if everyone's doing it at the same time, it gives them quite a nice combined language to talk about with each other, to understand, oh, sorry, that was my people pleaser. I know I said yes, I know I said I'd do that work for you, but actually that's just my overplaying it. And actually, when you give people a familiar language to talk to each other in, and everybody's on a learning journey, it really can help. I do a lot of work with teams do sort of confidence sessions, particularly with female teams, just thinking about some of that stuff that you talked about in terms of the gratitude and writing what went well, and really articulating their self-belief and their confidence. But I think when it comes to and there's an interesting example in the book about a team that the business was failing, and the CEO was kept up all night worrying about the performance of the business, worrying about his team. And he had a really strong controller saboteur, which is essentially it makes sense. You can't do anything without running it past me.
Yeah.
And because that was really overplaying, his team felt no lack of ownership, empowerment, and it was really difficult. And so the guy kind of came to Shazad and said, I don't know what to do. The business is failing. And he said, the number one thing you can do for a failing business is to ask your team this question every week. And the question is, what needs to happen for us to say in 5 years that this was the best thing that ever happened to the company? And so every week they did a team meeting and they started with that question. What needs to happen today for us to say in 5 years that this was the best thing that ever happened? And it was giving everybody the chance to be empowered and to come up with solutions, but to believe that there was going to be a positive outcome. But yeah, I think with teams it has a huge impact, and it's not about anyone being a negative problem. It's just about everyone's brain just works in a different way, and everyone has different challenges. But being able to, work together as from an external HR person, to go in and be able to get people to change the way that they're behaving and empower them to react in different ways. It's I just think it's magic if people have got that ability.
It is this whole thing about people's self-awareness, isn't it? And I completely concur. There's lots of things that if you have that common language, then it makes it safer, because of course the saboteurs will potentially be different. For one person's people pleaser, someone else has got the micromanaging one which you just described and it's having that out in the open. You can kind of recognize it in others. It takes away, you can support people in overcoming them as well, can't you? So it takes like stigma, and I'm sure we all have different ones. I reckon a lot of this goes back to our childhood. There'll be voices in our head from really deep, dark sorts of upbringing type stuff as to where these things come from, but we don't not always aware of it. But fundamentally, this is something which will improve us in the workplace, but this will also improve people their lives, full stop, right? So everything you do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because once you've started on this journey of a situation happen, it doesn't matter where it happens. You're absolutely right. Yes, you might deal with that difficult colleague, but once you know that they're struggling with the controller and the high achiever, you now know why they're so ridiculously difficult when you can't do something for them on a project. Is because they're saying in their heads, you're an idiot if you can't make this work. You're a failure if you don't make this project successful. Once you know that, you can help. But you're right, it has so many other positive connotations. It can be used in working with couples in terms of marriage counselling, as well as parenting. There's so many applications.
Parenting's a big one, isn't it? Because if you don't pass on, if you try not, you can pass on more healthy. We can teach your kids to manage this in their heads as well.
Yeah, really, and it's interesting because there's they said that there's the one thing that you can take from this that you can apply to parenting just like tonight when you get home is asking your children, why do I love you? And when they say, well, because I try hard at school, or because I'm really good at football, or you kind of just say, no, that's not the reason I love you. Why do I love you? And when they've exhausted all the reasons of why they've tried to make you proud, and why they've, you know, done all this, they have all these skills. Just say, I love you because you're you. And that's the biggest thing that you can say to a child. And taking this, the kind of the premise of positive intelligence is actually, you are worthy just because you exist. You are amazing just because you exist. And I think as we get older, and, you know, society kind of puts all these things into us, and we get older, we kind of don't really believe that we're great just as we are. We get kind of the, I'm only good if I've got this certificate. I'm only good if I achieve, if I run the half marathon in sub, you know, X amount of time. And I think there's a lot to be said for strengthening children's emotional resilience and their sage, so that they can carry that forward into life, because, you know, there's a lot
unconditional positive regard. That's basically what we're saying.
Exactly. And we're really bad at doing that to ourselves as grown-ups, which is why these programs feel like quite a, you know, can feel like you need to make a bit of a commitment to them and really focus on them, because we've had so many years of, I'm only good if I achieve an A in my science exam, you know, or whatever it is. So
it's not conditional. Interesting. As I say, it's a topic that I find it's valuable in the workplace. One of the things I was just reflecting on then, as I said to you earlier, I spoke to someone about resilience recently, and also years ago I trained on the 7 habits, which at the time felt like I had to persuade the organisation for us to do it. It almost seemed, because it was seen as almost personal development, it wasn't work. And it is interesting. I don't know whether basically we are becoming more enlightened in business, in organisations, realising that actually we are a whole people, therefore helping people's mindset is actually going to have one of the biggest impacts on them at work. You know, we used to almost have to think that's work, that's personal development, and this is an overlap. But I think it must be more and more important now in a post-pandemic, you know, hybrid working environment. Would you say it's more current at the moment?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think post-COVID, people seeing each other as, you know, full beings. They saw their kids running into Zoom calls, and, you know, that became quite normalized. But I think also this kind of acceptability of talking about mental health. Now, it's not specifically about, it's not a response to mental health, but actually, it's particularly when you're working alone or you're kind of got a hybrid setup. I'm finding that businesses are a lot more aware of what can we do to support people being their best generally, because actually some of it we don't see, and some of it they are navigating by themselves. So I think this idea of giving people the tools and techniques and empowerment to control how they respond in a situation that has been really, really difficult for many people over the last few years, I think there is an understanding of that need to treat people like 360-degree people, rather than just, you know, that's a work challenge actually. And it comes up, you can't control when your brain goes into that saboteur mode. It can happen when you miss a train, when you have a difficult conversation with a colleague at work, or when your child is really annoying at home and you think, oh God, it means I'm a bad parent or whatever. So I think there's a lot, and that can often, no matter what it is and what the topic is and what's triggered it, it feeds into everything that you're doing. So it is a distraction. So yeah, I think it's a really good point.
So I suppose just in sort of wrapping this up, taking some takeaways from this. Obviously, we could go and read more about it, which is interesting in its own right. And you sort of, would you do a training course? If someone's listening to this podcast and they'd like to do something on positive intelligence in their organisation, what sort of suggestions would you have?
So I think that, so I, as a positive intelligence coach, I have access to put people onto this 6-week program, to kind of, so you can put a whole team onto a 6-week program. There is a book called Positive Intelligence, which takes you through the background to it, the science, all of the kind of reasons why it would be really beneficial. So I think you could potentially, you know, give that to, I always kind of give it out at the end of my training sessions that I do with organizations, you know, for people to take away and read further, and do the free assessment online, you know, and start from that place where people can read about themselves. People love reading about themselves, don't they? So I always think that's quite an interesting, that's where I always start when I work with organizations, is like, send this out to your teams, and people come to the sessions going, oh my gosh, it's literally me. This is what's going on in my brain. How did you know? And when they start to talk about it, you can really see the kind of things dropping, like, you know, I've got huge anxiety and it comes from this place, and you can start making the link. So I do training with businesses, which obviously you can get someone in from outside, but the book is really easy to read, and there's an audio book available as well. So yeah, it's
Sounds great. I'm going to look at it myself. I'll get we'll get if you could perhaps send me the link, and we'll put it on the show notes for people who want to go and do the personal assessment. Is that on the Positive Intelligence website or something?
Yes, yeah, it is. I'll send you all the links. Yeah,
fantastic. Gemma, fascinating. I think I'm going to go and do the questionnaire myself now. Really lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me on the HR Uprising podcast. If people want to get in touch with you personally, how would they find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So Gemma Rabbini, and my website is coachandbloom.co.uk. So I'm always like to talk to people about these kind of things. I think
I will definitely put those links on the show notes as well, Gemma. So thank you very much. A fascinating topic.
Cool. You're absolutely welcome. It's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you for having me.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.